A very warm welcome to the first panel of um, this important forum, the third Geneva Forum 2020. Yesterday, we inaugurated the Geneva Forum 2020 virtual week with several important guests, including the President of Central Tibetan Administration, Dr. Lobsang Sangay. Today, we have a very esteemed panel moderated by Komotashi Pinzola, representative of Office of Tibet, Brussels. Before I introduce him to the panel and to our viewers, I would like to first invite all our participants to this important forum, and just a few housekeeping rules. I request all our participants to please stay mute. Once we start the question and answer session, please raise your hands and the moderator will call out your name and you can present your question. To all our viewers on the Facebook, yesterday you saw the entire 50 Cents army sending out so many comments, but rest assured, we will filter out your important question and hand it over to the moderator. So please join us with your important questions to our panelists. So without much ado, please permit me to introduce our moderator of this panel and a very important representative of Office of Tibet of Brussels, Komotashi Pinzola. Mr. Tashi Phuntsok is the representative of His Holiness Dalai Lama for the EU and Western Europe, based in Brussels. He took office in 2016. As a teacher, social advocate, and diplomat, he has dedicated nearly 40 years of his life in the service of the Tibetan community and has served the Central Tibetan Administration in various capacities. During his first office as the Director of Africa and Middle East Desk under the Department of Information and International Relations, he played a pivotal role in arranging His Holiness the Dalai Lama's maiden visit to South Africa and his meeting with President Nelson Mandela in 1996. Later, he established the Office of Tibet in Pretoria in 1997 and served there until 2001 as the representative. Mr. Phuntsok's other notable diplomatic role includes the representative for Office of Tibet Brussels and Paris from 2001 to 2005. His other administrative roles were the Secretary in the Department of Information and International Relations, Director of Tibetan Homes Foundation, Mussoorie, and Chief Representative of Southern Tibetan Settlements. Over to you, Komotashi Pinzola.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very honored to be moderator of this highly acclaimed panelists. It's a joy to be with you, and especially that we are holding this third Geneva Forum in a very different situation, unlike last year, where we all met together in Geneva. My panel will discuss today China's policy on rights to religious freedom and the global framework. This theme wishes to undertake to study the rights to religious freedom under global framework and China's policy there too. This subject is very important because right now we are at a very defining period. China in the past was never part of the global framework nor global relations. Whereas the global framework of religious freedom started from the end of First World War and Second World War, when various nations around the world came together to agree that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. At the same period, China became communist, and communism advocated religion as an opium, religion as a superstition, old thinkings as bad, and communism as the main religion. So today what we have is we have fundamentalism of communism and paramountcy of Communist Party in China. Whereas around the world, we are talking about fundamental rights, including religious freedom as an inalienable right of every individual. So within the last 50 years, when China came into international relations in 1971, till today, these two contradictory concepts have not reconciled. To the extent today we have reached a crossroad where the Chinese concept of human rights with Chinese characteristics overtaking the basic global framework of inalienable right of the individual. To the extent that in the last 4 years, all international fora and panels have been led by China. However, we are seeing a change in the global geopolitics. Therefore, I say we have reached a time of defining period. So to discuss this very important aspect of human rights in general, and in particular today, China's policy on religious freedom and global framework, we have very important panelists here. We have Dr. Tsering Topgyal, who is an assistant professor of international relations in the Birmingham University. We have Mr. Nury Turkell, Commissioner for the US Commission on Religious Freedom. Mr. Mikulas Peksa, who is a member of European Parliament. And of course, Madame Laurence Fehlmann Rielle from the Swiss National Council. So these four esteemed panelists will be speaking on different topics under this framework of the main theme. And to begin with, I would like to request Dr. Tsering Topgyal to present his topic. However, before that, I will give a brief description and introduction to Dr. Tsering Topgyal. Tsering Topgyal is a well-known Tibetan international relations expert, having written vastly on this subject, especially on China and Tibet and the perils of insecurity. He completed his PhD in the London School of Economics. Thereafter, he taught in the University of London at Royal Holloway. Right now, he is conducting the MA modules in the University of Birmingham. Dr. Tsering Topgyal, I'm very pleased to introduce you, and I'm very happy that you are speaking on China's policy on freedom of religion and realities thereunder. I pass the floor to you, Dr. Tsering Topgyal. Dr. Topgyal, could you unmute, please? Still, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can. Thank you.
Okay. So I started by thanking Tashi for the generous introduction and for the Geneva Forum for giving me this space. I also would like to begin with a clarification that I'm not a specialist or expert on religious affairs in China, but I was given this job, so to speak, of opening this panel. So my task or job probably is to lay the ground for what the following speakers will talk about in relation to the religious freedom in China. So what I will do is start by talking about the religious landscape in China and giving some brief basic information, and then go on to talk about the provision of religious freedom in China's official documents, and then the restrictions on religious freedom in China. I will move on to talk about the policy making, implementation and supervisory bodies with regard to religious affairs in China. And then I will talk about the religious policy under Xi Jinping particularly focusing on the sort of tightening of space and restriction on religious practice in China, and then give some explanatory remarks on why we are seeing this tightening up of space and restrictions on religious policy in China. So my main takeaway will be that there is a huge gap between the policy which provides religious freedom and its actual implementation and manifestation on the ground. Whatever religious belief we can think about, it's the same kind of experience. But obviously, there is a difference across, religious beliefs that are seen as traditional Chinese nativist kind of practices and religious practices such as Islam, Christianity, or Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, which are seen as not traditional Chinese practices. So we observe differences across religious practices or beliefs. To give an overview of the religious landscape, according to official Chinese figures, there are around 200 million Chinese citizens who believe in one religious belief or another. Obviously, this is undercounting the number of people, because it does not consider the underground Christians or practitioners of Chinese folk religions. So Freedom House gives a different figure, which goes up to 350 million religious believers. And if we break it down, we see 185 to 250 million Chinese people or citizens who practice some form of Buddhism, out of which around 6 million would be Tibetan Buddhists. And then, according to the Pew Research Center, there are around 294 million Chinese citizens who practice in one or another of the traditional Chinese folk beliefs, which also includes synthesis of Buddhist and Taoist practices and beliefs. According to the same sources, there are around 60 million Christians, out of which 58 million are Protestant, and the rest Catholics or some other Christian denominations. And there are around 22 million Muslims, out of which 11 are Uyghur Muslims from Xinjiang, constituting 1.8% of the entire population of the People's Republic of China. So that is sort of the landscape of religious belief in China today, as far as I could gather. And to move on to talk about, whether there is religious freedom or not, or according to the Chinese, constitution and more recent, documents, there is a provision of religious freedom. Article 36 of the constitution starts by stating that citizens of the People's Republic of China enjoy freedom of religious belief, and it goes on to talk about the fact that they should there is no compulsion or should not be any compulsion, whether by state organ or individuals or public organizations, to force anyone to believe or not to believe in any religion. And then it goes on to talk about the fact that there is no discrimination against citizens who believe or do not believe in any religion. So there is this provision of religious belief and a recognition that there are believers, which is reflected in the 5 state-recognized religious organizations: the Buddhist Association of China, Chinese Taoist Association, Islamic Association of China, the Three Self-Patriotic Movement, or a Protestant Christian organization, and the Chinese Catholic organization. So these are officially recognized, and all of them have representations at the low levels, the provincial level, regional level, and down to county level, and maybe township level as well. Another document that we should look at is the Regulation on Religious Affairs, which was signed by Prime Minister Li Keqiang, which went into effect on the 1st of February 2018, which also, apart from restating these provisions from the Constitution, the document also allows religious organizations to own property, publish religious literature, train and approve religious specialists, so clergy, and collect donations for religious purposes. So there is this provision of religious freedom. But as I was saying earlier, there is, even within these documents, there is a simultaneous restriction of religious freedom in the same documents. For instance, the Constitution provides that the state protects normal religious activities, right? But it is not defined what normal is and who gets to decide what is normal and what is not. And it is this ambiguity that allows the state agents and leaders and officials to restrict religious freedom in different contexts. And then it goes on to talk about the fact that no one may make use of religion to engage in activities that disrupt public order, impair the health of citizens, or interfere with the educational system. So these are also different ways, or various sort of vague and imprecise language, which is deliberately so that the state and the party can restrict religious belief and practice. And it also forbids any kind of foreign domination of religious specialists and centers and practices, which is again another instrument for restricting religious freedom. And then the new regulation in 2018 puts additional restrictions on religious schooling, restrictions on the times and locations of religious celebrations, monitoring of online religious activity, and restrictions on donations or the need to report donations that are above $15,900 more or less. And we can also say the same thing about the measures for the administration of religious groups, which is another regulation which went into effect on the 1st of February 2020, which recognizes those provisions of religious freedom, but also restricts freedom of practice in various ways. And then outside these official documents, we are all too familiar with the use of the security forces and the judicial bodies by the party and the state to persecute religious practitioners. China is seen to have one of the largest populations of religious believers, numbering over tens of thousands, and we all know from Xinjiang, Tibet, and also in other parts of Chinese regions of religious believers or practitioners being put in jail, detained, or even killed in these detention centers. So we also need to get a sense of who in this Chinese party-state apparatus have the sort of role in making policy, implementing policy, and supervising the implementation of policies. So obviously, from the state side of the Chinese government, party-state organization, until 2018, the top supervisory body was the State Administration for Religious Affairs. But this unit was disbanded, and the responsibility for giving sort of supervisory role on religious affairs was given to the United Front Department of the Chinese Communist Party. So it was taken from the state and given to the Communist Party's United Front Department. And then the CCP's propaganda department and also the leading small groups for issues like Tibet, they would, at the Politburo level, would come into play. And then the state ministries, such as State Ethnic Affairs Commission, and all the ministries, particularly the security-related ministries and the foreign ministry, will also have roles in or input into policy making. And then the national, provincial, and regional branches of the religious associations, which I introduced above, will also have some say in implementing or making policy as well. And we should not also forget the National People's Political Consultative Congress, which is composed of representatives from various ethnic minority groups or religious groups. So they would also have some input. But we should also see sort of a broader range of actors, such as the educational and research centers. In the case of Tibet, the China Tibetology Research Center, the minority or nationalities universities, or the so-called Minzu universities at the national level, provincial level, and the Academy of Social Sciences and their sort of equivalents at the provincial and regional level. We can also see local museums, bookstores, and even private charitable organizations with some role for policy sort of implementation, whether it's in the positive sense of practicing religious belief and preserving religious belief, propagating religious principles, or restricting those. So we should see a broader range of actors involved. But as we know, in the post-Mao period, after 1980s, there has been an opening up of space for various kinds of activities, including religious activities, which explains the very fast pace of growth of religious believers, whether Christian Protestants or Buddhists or Muslim believers. To such an extent that many of them have been able to co-opt the state religious boards and to serve their own local and religious interests, which is probably why Xi Jinping felt the need to tighten up the space for religious practice and put in additional control and restriction over religious practice. So I will move on to talk about Xi Jinping. So as I pointed out, up to Hu Jintao's period, there was this space and potential for religious believers to co-opt the state bodies. But under Xi Jinping, according to analysts like Ian Johnson, they see Xi Jinping and the Communist Party co-opting the other way, restricting and controlling religious practice and co-opting religious organizations and individuals to serve the interests of the Communist Party and the state. So Ian Johnson sees co-optation rather than assimilation and destruction as the main principle. But if you look at the sort of issues like Tibet, Xinjiang, and the policies towards Buddhists and Muslims, Tibetan Buddhists and Muslims in Uyghur, in Xinjiang, we see that there is a clear sort of agenda of Sinicization. So, Council on Foreign Relations, for example, wrote that under Xi Jinping, the CCP has pushed to Sinicize religion or shape all religions to conform to the doctrines of the officially atheist party and the customs of the majority Han Chinese population. So there is an assimilationist logic and dynamic clearly present when it is policy towards Tibetan Buddhists or Muslims, particularly Muslims from Xinjiang. And according to the new measures for the administration of religious groups, which came out in 2020, these religious individuals and bodies have been given the role of promoting the Chinese Communist Party's ideology and values. Right. So there's a clear, co-optation to serve the interests of the party, but also assimilation to into the customs of the majority Han Chinese. So when we talk about Sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism, we are talking about making Tibetan Buddhism closer to Chinese Buddhism and also serving the interests of the Communist Party and the state. The same measure for the administration of religious groups restricts any activities, religious activities that are not reviewed and approved by the government religious affairs body at all levels, from the township to the county to the national level. Right? So, how much time do I have? Can you remind me?
Dr. Topgyal, I think if you can conclude in a few moments, please.
Yeah. I'm coming to the very end. So, in terms of explaining why we observe this, tightening, we can see it from various policy frames. One is the second generation of ethnic policies sort of debate, which took place after the protest in Tibet in 2008 and the clashes in Xinjiang as well, which is essentially breaking down barriers and essentially flattening the ethnic and nationalist identities in China, and then sort of giving equal rights as citizens rather than as national or religious groups. So that policy debate has ended up, I think, in with Xi Jinping carrying out these kind of restrictive and assimilationist policies. We can also see it from the point of view of Xi Jinping's tightening up of space for civil society groups generally, because religious groups are considered civil society, and this has sort of an anti-Western element to it, which explains the sort of crackdown on Christians and Muslims and Tibetan Buddhists as well, and it also probably is explained by the ideological adherence of the Communist Party to atheism. So if the Communist Party or members join religious groups or profess any kind of religious beliefs, it is a fundamental attack to the very core of the existence of the Communist Party. And then it also probably is explained by Xi Jinping's nativism, his preference for traditional Chinese beliefs as sources of harmony and sort of a medicine against the moral decline that we have been talking about with regard to China. But from a theoretical angle, in my book, which was mentioned earlier, I talk about an insecurity dilemma, a weak and insecure Chinese state, party state, trying to address these insecurities by state building and assimilation of groups like the Tibetans and Uyghurs, and religion being at the center of their identity. They feel threatened and respond again, terrorist activities or self-immolation or various forms of resistance. And the state and these groups get caught up in cycles of state building on the one hand and resistance on the other hand. I'm giving some policy frames as well as a theoretical framework to understand the recent crackdown on religious belief under Xi Jinping. So I will end here.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tsering Topgyal. I think you made it very clear on two issues. Firstly, about the contradiction of Chinese policy and implementation vis-à-vis the universally accepted concept of right to religious freedom on the one hand. Secondly, I think you also made it very clear that though China's constitution and other policy documents give right to religious freedom, in practice there are many obstacles and restrictions that imposes absolute obstacle for general public to practice what is constituted in the constitution. So in that regard, it makes us very clear that over the last 50 years, the universally accepted Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a concept of individual right to freedom of thought and conscience is still not implemented by a UN member and a permanent member, that is China. Before I go to next speaker, I would like to make a mention of a very respected political prisoner who died recently in Switzerland, Tanajine Sampo, who spent 37 years in Chinese prison and died in October this year in Switzerland at the age of 94. A generation of people who suffered under China with very flowery constitutional rights, but in practice imposing barbarian, inhuman obstacles for practice of basic human rights. Our next speaker I move to is Mr. Mikulas Peksa, the member of European Parliament. Because of his commitment to the committee meetings in the European Parliament, we have changed the order of speakers, and I hope other panelists will not mind. Mr. Peksa is a very close friend of Tibet and also a veteran of Geneva Forum, because last year also Mr. Peksa was in Geneva, participating in Geneva Forum. Mr. Peksa comes from Czech Republic, a country which is very dear to Tibetans and His Holiness Dalai Lama, for the very important relationship that their former president had with His Holiness Dalai Lama. And Forum 2000 is still continuing as a legacy of the former president. Mr. Peksa comes from Pirate Party in Czech Republic, but in European Parliament, he is in the Committee of Research, Industry, Energy, Budgetary and Economic Affairs. And more than that, he is president of Tibet Interest Group, which is an advocacy group in the European Parliament advocating for Tibet. So Mr. Peksa will be speaking on EU policy on freedom of religion and China's adherence under global framework. Mr. Peksa, your 15 minutes starts now.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you all for participating, and I might deep apologize for the inconvenience with organizing of that respective meeting. It's absolutely like ridiculous in the times we are living in nowadays. I have to admit that I'm no really like expert on behalf of in the field of religion in China. However, I think there are some universal values regarding the religion we all across the globe do share. Like freedom of religion is a fundamental right protected under European and the international law. And the European Union recognizes the faith-based organizations that they play a pivotal role in a number of fields such as development and conflict resolution. The European Union makes it clear that it promotes and protects this freedom both in its internal and external relations. However, this freedom is currently under attack in China, and we must do much more to prevent it. The religious oppressions in places such as Xinjiang and Tibet, as well as the systemic persecution of Christians under the pretense that religions in China must be Chinese in orientation, are in direct violation of this fundamental right that is universally respected. Recent Chinese regulations signal a crackdown on religious activities that are not state sanctioned under the cloak of national security and control of foreign influence. But even if one were to entertain these arguments, the concentration camps currently in use cannot be justified by any means. The European Parliament has voiced its disapproval through the use of urgency resolution, but this must be taken further. It's clear that the figures from China and those identified by external sources are vastly different, meaning the full extent of religious oppression in regions such as Xinjiang and Tibet cannot be accurately understood. Further pressure must be put on transparency when discussing so-called labor or re-education camps with the Chinese partners or parties. The issues in China go beyond the right to religious freedom. Their authoritarian approach towards minorities through various means, as illustrated, bears the signs of genocide. We cannot stand by and allow this sort of violations to go unchallenged on the international stage. Economic sanctions and the highest possible diplomatic pressures are really needed to help those persecuted people who are persecuted for their religious beliefs. The sanctions need not to be exclusive to the Chinese states, but also can be applied to businesses in the provinces or those participating in the atrocities. Over the last few decades or years, the security has drastically tightened, or like the control has drastically tightened, especially in the regions known to have large ethnic minority populations. A sizable increase in police presence and comprehensive surveillance systems have been installed in order to monitor and suppress religious thoughts. China's mass surveillance system is used to control routine behavior, curb internal communication, and isolate regions like Xinjiang and Tibet from the rest of the world. The use of drones shows that China treats all minorities as enemies of the state. They do not single out so-called alleged terrorists, as argued in official documents, but they intimidate really the entire communities, including those they claim to be protecting. The Chinese government has been managed to turn the religion against the people in Xinjiang by tracking Muslims through the use of Beijing-based app called the Paya that encourages users to download the Quran and share religious teachings with each other. In leaked documents, it was revealed that the government then uses this to conduct a target crackdown in the Muslim Uyghur population. This breaches a multitude of fundamental rights, such as religious expression and right to privacy, and simply cannot be defended by arguments against foreign influences, as the Chinese government tries from time to time. The Orwellian use of social credit system, where your credit score can improve by aiding authorities in enforcing the restrictions of religious practices, reporting public practitioners, and coercing individuals to renounce their faith, also cannot be justified by any means. This approach, used to manipulate the population away from the religion and towards absolute support of the Communist Party, must be stopped in order to protect the other freedoms from the risk of violation. The technology used to create digital authoritarianism systematically exploits personal data and is used to constantly track the population. These surveillance concerns are becoming even more prominent with the ways in which China monitors the activities of the religious diaspora in a bid to strengthen the authority of Communist Party or one-party rule. The most prominent example is the Dalai Lama, whom the Chinese government accuses of steering political separatism in Tibet. China expects or blames foreign governments with whom it has relations to refrain from official contacts with religious leaders, and has previously wielded economic sanctions or frozen diplomatic ties in such circumstances. This shows extraterritorial pressure to conform to Chinese oppressive religious policies and is already being challenged in Europe and beyond. We know the Chinese regime does not like disobedience, but we cannot bow to such an authoritarian approach to religion in the international politics. China appears to operate under the assumption that the religions and the Communist Party are mutually exclusive. They cannot function together, as one will always take a priority over the other. Well, this is not the case in the clear violations of citizens' rights in Xinjiang, Tibet, and across China must be stopped. In my role of president of the Tibet interest group in the European Parliament, I have repeatedly called on the Chinese government to investigate the ongoing cases of forced disappearances and ill treatment of individuals based on their religious beliefs. In the Tibet interest group's meeting of this parliamentary term, we highlighted the importance that raising awareness and understanding of the Tibetan people and culture has on the international stage to ensure that practices are not lost through Chinese authoritarian approach to the religion and religious practices. This is equally applicable in Xinjiang and all ethnic minorities in China. I've participated in marches for human rights in China and believe that more events like this should be done to help raise further awareness of the abuses currently happening in places like Tibet or Xinjiang. I've also written to European Commissioner for Justice to call upon the Chinese government to ensure freedom of religion in Tibet by freeing 10th Panchen Lama, a letter which was co-signed by various European parliamentary colleagues. We must support these minority communities and stay on the front line of struggle against expanding Chinese surveillance system and their digital dictatorship. Maybe just to summarize it, the European Union is increasingly open to religious organization and promotes cooperation with such institutions on a variety of matters, providing protections through various legislative materials. However, China appears to be operating in the opposite way, actively seeking to clamp down on unapproved religious practices under the guise of foreign influence and anti-China sentiment. I believe that European member states must be more united when it comes to breaches of the fundamental values of the European Union and the international community that hold us together. We must ensure that China gets strict feedback on its oppressive religious policies. Clear requirements are really needed from what the international trade to also the other policies. State buying Chinese from firms ensuring or engaging in surveillance are in fact enabling the prosecution of religious groups, and more must they should be restricted at least in their international activities that are really like interconnected to the local activity. So we really have to ensure and encourage religious freedom in China to be restored to the respective international standards. I know, like, maybe that's just for the introduction. If should there be more questions, I'm gladly open to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Peksa. Since Mr. Peksa is leaving very soon, may I take this opportunity for the panelists to ask any question that you may have on his presentation, because he will not be present during the question and answer session.
I will probably be back. I hope so. I just have to give my report in the European Parliament, but I will be back as soon as possible.
Okay, and thank you very much then, Mr. Peksa. We will leave you there, and of course, to thank you for making a very calm and judicious, but very scathing presentation of EU's policies and Chinese adherence thereto. We have very clearly experienced that China has not adhered to the global framework of religious freedom and also all other fundamental rights, and questions regarding the trade and copyright and all those matters of not having a level playing field. We have very clearly expressed that there needs to be more robust challenges from the European Union to face China's arrogance and aggressiveness in the international field. Thank you very much, Mr. Peksa, once again. We will move to the next speaker. Next speaker is Commissioner Nury Turkell. Most welcome, Mr. Turkell, and very pleased to have you.
Thank you.
This is, I think, first meeting, and we're pleased to have you. You have been appointed to this commission by Madam Speaker Pelosi in May 2020, and of course, you are very highly educated, first Uyghur, US educated American attorney, and of course, more importantly, as a co-founder of the Uyghur Human Rights Project, which has been at the forefront of presenting Uyghur people's rights and struggle across the world, not only through your speeches, but through your presentation in the various international fora, culminating in helping facilitate policies on Uyghur and religious freedom, and also being very active in the international media to present the case of Uyghur people's freedom struggle. And more importantly, you have been named as one of the most influential people in the world by Time this year. So most welcome, Commissioner Turkell, and we are very pleased to have, of course, you as a Uyghur and also a commissioner and also a US citizen to be on the panel, and you'll be speaking on US policy on freedom of religion and China's adherence under global framework. The floor is yours, Commissioner. 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking the Tibetan Bureau for inviting me to participate in this important conference. On behalf of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USERF, it is truly an honor to join you all, and thank you for my co-panelists for participation. Since 2018, the Geneva Forum has provided a space for diplomats, civil society, academics, and other experts to highlight the violation of religious freedom perpetrated by the government of China against people of faith. I'm deeply grateful for your work, and today's topic is a timely one on the face of the increased religious repression in Xi Jinping's China. It gives us an opportunity to highlight the Chinese government's persecution of Tibetan Buddhists and other people of faith in China, as well as the US government's response to China's egregious violation of religious freedom. It is certainly my hope that the robust US leadership in response to these atrocities will prompt concerted efforts and actions from the broader international community. Before we begin, please allow me to briefly touch upon the work of USERV, which has long been raising the alarm about China's religious freedom violations. As you may know, USERV is an independent, bipartisan government body created more than 20 years ago by the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. Our mandate is to monitor religious freedom abroad and to make policy recommendations to the President, Secretary of State, and Congress. Our work is led by 9 commissioners appointed by the President and the Republican and Democratic leaders in the House of Representatives and Senate. I'm greatly honored to have been appointed to the Commission in May of this year by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to be the first Uyghur American to serve as a USERV commissioner. In 2016, Speaker Pelosi appointed the first Tibetan American to serve as USERV commissioner, Professor Tenzin Dorji. Dr. Dorji was commissioner from 2016 through 2020 and was elected by his fellow commissioners to be USERV's chair in 2018 through 2019. Through the initiatives like the Religious Prisoners of Conscience Project, or RPOC project, USERV commissioners advocated on behalf of specific individuals imprisoned for their religious affiliation or advocacy. USERV has consistently raised the case of Gyaltsab Nema, the 11th Panchen Lama recognized by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Currently, the Panchen Lama is one of the religious prisoners of conscience for whom USERV actively advocates. Many of you are likely familiar with the USERV's annual report, which covers countries that USERV recommends the State Department either designate as countries of particular concern or include in the special watch list. USERV has recommended China as a country of particular concern since its first report in 1999. As USERV has consistently reported, the Chinese government continues to pursue a policy of forced assimilation and suppression of Tibetan Buddhists through its sinicization campaigns. Even though the Chinese Communist Party is officially atheist, it claims the right to determine religious issues. It has repeatedly stated its intent to interfere in the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama via government fiat. And it has targeted Tibetan Buddhists, including monks and nuns who have refused to denounce the Dalai Lama, subjecting them to political indoctrination, forcing them to worship Chinese Communist Party leaders. And they're forced to study what's called Xi Jinping thoughts in recent years. The Chinese government has actively demolished residences, monasteries, and other religious sites that are important to the Tibetan Buddhist faith. Most tragically, many Tibetans have protested the Chinese government's repressive policies through self-immolation. Today, as the world begins to turn its attention on the atrocities committed against the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in China, we cannot let Tibetan Buddhists be forgotten. China's dismal human rights record stands in stark contrast to and direct in violation of China's obligation under international standards. China has assented to a number of international instruments that protect freedom of religion and belief. For example, it has endorsed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR, and is signatory to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Article 18 of UDHR and Article 18 of ICCPR both guarantee the right of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Specifically, the ICCPR states that, quote, no one shall be subject to coercion which would impair his freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice. China voted in support of the 1981 Declaration on the elimination of all forms of intolerance and of discrimination based on religion or belief. The Declaration reiterates the right to freedom of religion and non-discrimination in terms more or less identical to those of the UDHR and the ICCPR. In its response to UN Human Rights Council's 2018 Universal Periodic Review, UPR, the Chinese government promised to actively participate in international cooperation in human rights and pledged its support for the work of UN Human Rights Mechanism. China was recently elected to the UN Human Rights Council, of which it has served previously, for a term starting in 2021. Human Rights Council members are required under the term of the UN resolution that created the Council to, quote, uphold the highest standard in the promotion and protection of human rights, end quote. But despite these international obligations that the Chinese government has promised to uphold, it persistently and consistently persecutes religious believers of sorts, Tibetan Buddhists, Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims, Christians, Falun Gong practitioners, and many others in China. The tactics that the Chinese government uses against these different religious groups are also disturbingly similar. Some instances, they recycle some of the repressive policies. Synicization campaigns through transformation and re-education camps, political indoctrinations, forced labor, mass destruction of religious sites, and prohibiting children from learning about their religion against the wishes of their parents. The list goes on and on. The former Communist Party Secretary of Tibet, Chen Quanguo, that many people around the world now know, uses the similar tactics to suppress Uyghurs in East Turkestan that the Chinese government called Xinjiang, that he employed first in Tibet. Basically, he got promoted for his success in Tibet. In the face of mounting criticism and scrutiny from the international community, the Chinese government often downplays the egregious of these atrocities it has committed. Other times, it simply denies them altogether. It often pushes back against the international community, saying others have no right to interfere in China's internal affairs, or that Western concept and standards of human rights don't apply to China. It sounds absurd. Also, the Chinese government uses the notion that China is still a developing nation as a pretext for its egregious human rights and religious freedom record, even as it projects itself in the international arena as a great power equal to the United States. None of these are valid excuses, as you know. China cannot rightly claim its status as a great power while acting as one of the worst human rights violators in the world. And it cannot have it both ways. China cannot be a great power while breaking the international standards, even its own constitution, even its counterterrorism laws, all of which has to promise the constitution, China's constitution, and its uphold or obligation on international law is something that they must follow and must uphold. The international community must do more to hold the Chinese government accountable for these abuses. In this regard, the United States has taken a number of actions to counter the Chinese government's violation of religious freedom. There's a bipartisan, bicameral support for religious freedom involving the Tibetan Buddhists and the Uyghur Muslims in China. Religious freedom for the Tibetan people especially is an issue that enjoys broad bipartisan support, as I pointed out, in the United States government, both in the executive branch and the legislative branch. The U.S. State Department has designated China as a country of particular concern for systematic, ongoing, and egregious religious freedom violations, including in Tibet every year since 1999, most recently in December 2019. As a consequence of this designation, the United States restricts the exports of certain equipment to China. China also has featured prominently in the Trump administration's effort relating to international religious freedom, an issue that it has made a high priority in the foreign policy. For example, China's religious freedom violations were highlighted at both ministerials to advance religious freedom that the administration hosted in 2018 and 2019. Additionally, in early 2020, the Trump administration appointed Sarah Makin to serve in the National Security Council staff as the president's advisor on international religious freedom, an action USCIRF has long been advocating. USCIRF welcomed Ms. Makin's appointment and has worked closely with her on religious freedom issues, including in China. And in October, USCIRF celebrated Robert Destro's appointment as a special coordinator for Tibetan issues at the State Department, also an action that USCIRF had urged for years. The filling of this role ensures that there's a voice in the U.S. government looking out for the rights and interests of the Tibetan people. In July, the United States government implemented another USCIRF recommendations by sanctioning several senior Xinjiang Chinese government officials, including Chen Quanguo, former party secretary of Tibet, who oversaw extensive abuses in Tibetan area, using many of the same horrific practices and policies currently employed in the Uyghur region. Finally, in January, USCIRF welcomed the U.S. House of Representatives' passage of the Tibetan Policy and Support Act, H.R. 4331. If also passed by the Senate and signed by the President, the bill would establish an official U.S. policy supporting the selection of Tibetan religious leaders, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, by the Tibetan Buddhist community and free of Chinese government's interference. In addition, it will require the State Department to seek to open a consulate in Lhasa. In conclusion, I'd like to say that the international community must continue through policy actions, advocacy to impose costs on the Chinese government and China's Communist Party for its abuses against the Tibetan, Uyghur, Christian, and many others in China. By leading the charge against these ongoing religious freedom violations, the United States can encourage the like-minded international partners and allies to stand up to China and hold its government accountable for these atrocities, which should rightly be called, in the words of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the stain of the century. With that, I'd like to thank you again for allowing me to participate in this conference. I look forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you, Commissioner. You have been very, very to the point and timing also. Nevertheless, we can still hear the disappointment vis-à-vis Chinese abrogation of international framework and deficiency of Chinese part in implementing various international covenants and policies. Of course, you have also highlighted the massive work having been done by the United States of America. We look forward to further robust actions from your commission as well as from the United States of America. Our final panelist is Madame Laurence Fehlmann Rielle, member of Swiss National Council. Very, very good afternoon, Madam. Welcome to the Geneva Forum. Madam Rielle is member of Federation on Prevention of Alcoholism and Cannabis and has been a member of Geneva Council, President of Geneva Socialist Party, Council member of Geneva Municipality, and of course, Madam has a master's degree in public health and currently member of Swiss National Council. Madam Rielle will be speaking on Swiss policy on freedom of religion vis-à-vis China. Madam, the floor is yours. And also, before I let Madam speak, I would like to urge the audience and others to raise their hands if they have questions, because after Madam's presentation, we'll be starting the Q&A session. Thank you. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak in this panel. As I am not an expert on the religion issue, but as MP of Switzerland and also member of the Interparliamentary Group on Tibet, I feel some responsibility towards what is happening in China in terms of violation of human rights and violation of freedom of religion. So as a preliminary remark, I would like to underline the fact that throughout the world, the freedom of religion remains an important issue. Many people with faith in different religions face persecutions and sufferings. An American committee set up 20 years ago reported in 2019 that in many countries a severe repression is launched against people in reason of their faith. Among these countries, China is particularly quoted because of the repression exerted against Buddhist Tibetans, Christians, Muslims, Uyghur, and Falun Gong practitioners. But of course, the human rights defenders are in the target as well. Some words on the situation in Switzerland about religion. Federal recognition of the principle of religious freedom and state neutrality dates back to Switzerland in 1874. It has been confirmed and even strengthened by constitutional revision in 2016. The Federal Constitution of 1990, which entered into force on January 1st, 2000, guarantees freedom of conscience and belief in Article 15 as follows. First, freedom of conscience and belief is guaranteed. Second, everyone has the right to freely choose their religion as well as to forge their philosophical convictions and to profess them individually or in community. Like all other freedoms, freedom of conscience and belief may be restricted under the condition of Article 36 of the Constitution. This requires in particular that any restriction of a fundamental right have a legal basis. That means it must be justified by a public interest or the protection of the fundamental rights of others and be proportionate to any cause. The right of each individual and group to profess their religion has a corollary, the obligation of the public authorities to observe religious neutrality and to refrain from hindering, without overriding justification, the exercise of religious beliefs. In this sense, it aims to preserve the freedom of religion of citizens, but also to maintain, in a spirit of tolerance, religious. This extract is taken from a judgment of the Federal Court. Article 8 of the Federal Constitution also prohibits any discrimination based in particular on origin or religious, philosophical or political beliefs. As we know, application of this principle are not always so easy because some religions have traditions that bring reactions at the political level and in the society. So we had to face initiatives such as the one which had for result to prohibit the minarets of the mosque, although it wasn't causing any problem, to my opinion. The same nasty debate will come soon with the prohibition of the so-called burqa, which is not existing in Switzerland. But anyway, these phenomena don't call into question the principle of freedom of religion in Switzerland. Now to come to the problem of religion in China. I would like to quote an article published in February 2018 by Cyril Plouyet of Associated Press. It reports that China reinforced its controls over the religions. These measures aim at reinforcing the national security and struggling against so-called foreigner infiltrations. For instance, these measures prohibit to accept gifts of money coming from foreign associations, non-authorized gatherings are heavily punished, and the opening of religious schools are subject to very strict conditions. The Tibetan monks are permanently watched, and the Chinese authorities took control on the main center of Tibetan Buddhism in the Sichuan province. The control process is growing over the Uyghurs with the argument that the Muslims may be linked to jihadist groups. The Christians are also victims of this policy of intimidation. So it was also the speakers before me also gave a lot of details about these problems. How does Switzerland react in this context? In June 2018, the 16th session of the Human Rights Dialogue between Switzerland and China took place in Beijing. The confidential framework in which the talks took place fostered an open, constructive and mutually critical debate on the prevailing human rights situation both internationally and in the two countries. The justice system and the sentencing system, as well as minority rights, were at the heart of the discussions. Switzerland has expressed its deep concern about the criminal proceedings to which lawyers and human rights defenders are subject, as well as the harassment and attacks on the mental and physical integrity of which they are the victims. In doing so, he relied on individual cases. An in-depth discussion was held on the death penalty. The rights of women and people with disabilities were also discussed. Switzerland has spoken critically about the protection of minorities and their rights in Tibet and the Xinjiang region. In this context, she insisted on the deterioration of the human rights situation in Xinjiang and on the serious human rights abuses committed in the so-called re-education camps in which thousands of Uyghurs participate. The dialogue also focused on the multilateral engagement of the two countries. Switzerland also took the opportunity to recall the mandates of the United Nations human rights mechanisms, that of the Human Rights Council in particular, and to stress the importance of civil society part in these international arrangements. For recall, the human rights dialogue between Switzerland and China was established in 1991. But in an article, the former director of ICRC, the Red Cross, Paul Grossrieder, reported that in July 2013, Switzerland signed a free trade agreement with China. In 2014, the two federal chambers ratified the 1,000 pages of this treaty, which does not contain any mention of human rights, nor of labor rights such than foreseen by the International Labour Organization. This agreement is unique in Europe, and we can recognize that it brings commercial benefits to our industries. However, in its current form, this engagement with China is problematic for a country that presents itself as one of the guarantors of law and human rights in the world. Regarding the will of supremacy of Xi Jinping, the European Union has hardened its positions, and it is by strengthening other partnerships, in particular with Japan, South Korea, or India, that Europe is seeking to rebalance its relationships with China. The Swiss authorities, for their part, remain satisfied with the free trade agreement. Our foreign minister speaks of challenges and differences, and has always expressed his concerns about the human rights situation. But this does not affect, they said, the friendly relationship with the people who value. However, relations between the two countries don't go always so smoothly. Switzerland and China human rights dialogue scheduled for summer 2019 was suspended by China, which reportedly reacted to the publication of a letter co-signed by Burma calling on Beijing to end the detention of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. The letter, co-signed by Burma and 22 other states, was addressed to the President of the UN Human Rights Council. It called on the Chinese government to end the arbitrary detention of Uyghurs in Xinjiang and to allow the High Commissioner for Human Rights unrestricted access to this region of the far west of China, where the government is accused of having locked up to 1 million members of Turkish-speaking Muslim minorities in so-called re-education camps. Beijing did not blame Switzerland directly for criticizing its Xinjiang policies, but rather for Burma's public display of this concern alongside other members of the international community. It is because the Chinese Communist Party prefers to discuss the angry subject out of sight. It involves periodic meetings where Swiss and Chinese representatives discuss in strictly confidential sessions. This lack of transparency is criticized by NGOs and political actors. Many MPs in Switzerland ask questions or raise the problem of the double standard message delivered by Switzerland. On the one hand, we promote human rights, and on the other, we manage to go on with economic relationships. Often, the balance tilts in favor of business relationships. As you may know, Switzerland is one of the first Western countries to recognize the Europe from China. I think that we should dialogue in general, which includes the freedom of practicing their own religion in unofficial occasion, because it is an opportunity to transmit messages. But we also have to expose the differences of opinions publicly in order to push China to make a change. It is a constitutional mandate to claim the Swiss position in the field of human rights. To conclude, I would like to strike attention to a resolution that the Parliament of the Canton of Geneva recently addressed to the Federal Parliament regarding the agreement between the Swiss and the Chinese authorities allowing China to investigate in Switzerland about the Chinese nationals. It asked the Federal Parliament first to develop concrete measures in order to put an end to acts of surveillance and intimidation, including minority communities such as Uyghur or pro-democracy opponents or Tibetans, who are the object in Switzerland, in particular by opposing the renewal of the agreement allowing Chinese authorities to investigate Swiss territory. Second, to take all measures to ensure that freedom of expression and situation in East Turkestan, as well as the human rights situation in China, is fully guaranteed in Switzerland. So this resolution will be discussed in the next weeks in the Swiss Parliament. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Rielle. As of now, we have no questions, but we are very grateful to Madam Rielle for her presentation and specifically, in a nutshell, expressing disappointment at the confidential, non-transparent dialogue being held within chambers. This is not very unfamiliar because in all other parts of the world also, including the European Union, when EU-China dialogue or EU-Swiss dialogue or EU-America dialogue or China-America dialogue, China never answers questions but gives lectures. And of course, as you say, business takes over the priority, and human rights and fundamental rights are overwhelmed and overshadowed by business considerations. As we have no question, I would like to take this opportunity to ask a question to Dr. Dr. Tsering. I hope you are hearing me. After hearing the
Yes.
presentations of other panelists, Doctor, what recommendations you would make to each of them to see that China adheres to the global framework of religious freedom? As you have heard all of them presenting their case, but we still see China not adhering to the global framework. So what recommendations or suggestions you would make to each of the panelists?
Yeah, that's a very big job, because we have three very different panelists with very different roles and responsibilities. I guess for Mr. Nuri Turkell, yeah, I had a question around the response of the Muslim world towards the Chinese policies in Xinjiang, because we notice this difference when the Muslim world reacts to events and developments in Palestine, for example, and what is going on in Xinjiang. So I had a question, but I can also sort of turn that around and maybe sort of answer the question that was posed in a form of a recommendation. Maybe the Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in China, the Kazakhs and the Hui and the other Muslims should form a more sort of united front and engage the Muslim world more, to address this discrepancy between the Muslim world's reactions to Xinjiang as opposed to what is going on in other sort of places. And then with a stronger Muslim backing from around the world, supplemented with the responses of the Western governments, at some point would be a stronger push to China to improve, the rights of the Muslims generally in China, but also particularly the Uyghurs. And for our two European panelists, Mr. Peksa and Ms. Laurence, because you are in various important places in the European sort of politics. I would recommend the Europeans again present a stronger united front. I have been making this point, and lots of other people have made the point that China is expert at using the divide and rule strategy, right? And even before the Communist Party came to power, it had used the so-called united front strategy towards the Japanese, towards the ethnic minorities, when they were consolidating their control over Tibet, and this policy, as I was mentioning earlier, has been upgraded under Xi Jinping, and it is being used in Australia to increase Chinese influence in Canada and also in various European countries. But we notice very little sort of move from the European side to come together and present a stronger united front. Obviously, that would entail ultimately working with the United States, in Canada, and other like-minded countries to put stronger pressure on China on not just religious freedom but also the other human rights issues. So that would be my sort of strongest recommendation at this point.
Thank you very much. Now, as we don't have any questions, can we give short periods or shorter few minutes to each panelist to sum up if they desire? So, Mr. Peksa, if you would like to sum up or make concluding remarks, please.
Yes, gladly. I think it was mentioned here, and it somehow touched the one of the most painful issue the European Union faces, and that's the unity. Like, yes, what is needed to really like resolve this issue is sort of like strong alliance, strong unity across the European politicians when dealing with these issues. We need to really like raise awareness about the whole problem, so that there will be no exclusion, no way how to apologize the fact that someone is deliberately turning blind eye on the issues of religious freedom in China. That's a big issue and big challenge, and we as Europeans will have to work on it. That's what shall be admitted. I mean, like Europe as a whole still has a huge economic power, and it definitely has a great capacity to be a counterpart or like a counterbalance for Chinese activities. However, it has to proactively start acting. And there we have the problem, and that's what we need to change. So if or whoever is kind of like watching this discussion of ours, please keep it in mind. And when there will be discussions about China, remind it, and that we need to stay united and take our part in this common global effort to ensure fundamental rights all across the world.
Thank you, Mr. Peksa. Now, next, Mr. Turkell, your concluding remarks. And if I may, would you see change in policy or actions against China vis-a-vis the abrogation of international frameworks on religious freedom and other freedom with expected change in the leadership in the White House? Thank you, Mr. Turkell.
Thank you very much. A couple of clarifications and announcement, actually. The Chinese government can say that they are implementing these repressive policies. Some experts start calling it as a genocide, particularly the ones imposed on the Uyghur people. So I want to make this as clear as possible that China's policies and reactions has nothing to do with terrorism. They can claim, they can cite incidents, but no one to this day was able to verify or substantiate the claims. So the Chinese either show us what they have that we can examine through an objective process, validation and verification. Otherwise, they're just using counterterrorism as a pretext to suppress religious freedom with respect to the Uyghurs and others. Just last week, Secretary Pompeo revoked a decision made back in 2002, designating this obscure organization, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, as a terrorist organization. So that's a big step in the process that has been welcomed by Uyghur activists and the security experts. On the Muslim countries' potential support or silence, I think we should focus on the countries that has citizens who can express their views freely, unlike most of the Muslim societies. And I don't think that this is a secret to anyone that most of those majority Muslim countries are not a type of a Jeffersonian democracy, that the governments or the people can take to the streets and the press, their media can report the actual happenings. And also, sadly, the Chinese government turned them into a client state, namely countries like Pakistan has been doing Chinese propaganda. So I think we should focus on the Western democracies that appreciates religious freedom, cherishes civil liberties. I think I'm focusing on Muslim countries to be a little bit more an effective focus. Particularly the European countries should look into this in two aspects. The Europeans have survived fascism and Nazi Germany. They know exactly what happens and how it happened, how it ends when a government regime focuses on a particular religious minority. Religious persecution is crimes against humanity, and it's a precursor for genocide. If the world international community think that what is happening to the Uyghurs and Tibetans is another human rights concern, that they're making a mistake. This is going to affect everybody's life. China is actively promoting exporting its repressive policies through technology exportation. So this is affecting everybody's life. And also, the consumers should be vigilant. The Chinese are sending tainted products made by Uyghur forced laborers, modern-day slaves around the world, polluting the global supply chain. Even the PPEs, the protective personal equipment, being used in hospitals by individuals, reportedly being produced by Uyghur slaves. So it's already part of our lives, so we can no longer ignore. As for the new administration, as I pointed out, the China, there's a thing called China consensus in Washington, which is, some people call it threat, some people call it competition, some people call it challenge. Regardless, there's more than 70% of the population, according to the recent survey, has a negative view towards China, especially the current Chinese government. It involves religious persecution. It involves eroding civil liberties, rule of law in Hong Kong, and threat against Taiwan, and threat against U.S. national security interest, economic interest. And I don't think that the American people, the U.S. government, whoever occupies the White House, could go on business as usual in the face of Chinese government's increased and ratchet up repression of its ethnic religious minorities. And also, importantly, the U.S. government has to address this potential threat posed by the Chinese government in various aspects: economic aspect, technology aspect, societal aspect. The Chinese government's activities around the world have been summed with three words: corrosive, corrupt, and coercive. And recently, covert has also been added. So there's a recognition in the United States. Recognition is almost as important as taking action when you're facing a challenge. There's a bipartisan, bicameral support addressing particularly the issues that we concern with respect to China. Incoming administration, the President-elect Biden has a history of supporting human rights. People rightfully give him a lot of credit for even establishing the Radio Free Asia in the mid-90s. So he's a foreign policy expert. He has a judicial background. He's served in the Senate for 37 years, 8 years in the vice president position. So I reasonably, in my personal official capacity, expect there will be a continuity in the new administration on China policy.
Thank you, Commissioner Turkell. And the last word from Madame Rielle, if you have any concluding remarks to make.
It's me?
Yes.
You hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. Yes. So yes, we discussed about the problem of freedom of religion, but about the Tibetan, about the Muslims minorities, but surely there are other minorities, as you said, other than the Uyghurs and the Falun Gong practitioners who are really much persecuted in China. But it's in fact the basic of the human rights, and that I'm sure that's also the ordinary people in China may be oppressed if they are not on the right path of that the Communist Party wants. But I can join what Mr. Turkell said about we can act on the economic level. We are importing so many products from China, some from high technology, some really basic products that are not always good quality, and that also made sometimes in the prison, and that we have our duties to raise awareness about how these products are made, and maybe make a pressure on this topic. And also, as you said, that we should also get united to make political pressure on China because of its policy. Because we know that China doesn't like to have a bad image, and then it's really important to expose its policy, the violation of the human rights and freedom of religion, and in different forums. There, of course, the Human Rights Council, but also other forums, in order to maybe to make really good pressure, political pressure on China on this problem of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Rielle. Thank you very much to all the panelists, Dr. Tsering, Topgyal, Commissioner Turkell, MEP Peksa, and also thank you very much to Geneva Forum organizers, Office of Tibet, Geneva, Tenzin Chuki, Representative Chimela, Keldenla, and others. Since we have run out of time, I would like to thank you once again and request everyone to join us again tomorrow at the same time, when there will be the second panel on the subject of religious persecution, crackdown on people of faith in China. And there will be again eminent panelists, Dr. Tenzin Suljim, Nijat Turgan, Father Bernardo Cavalera, Mary Bakhter. There will be 4 panelists tomorrow at the same time. Please join us again. And lastly, but most importantly, there has been one question, but since we have run out of time, I would like Tenzin Chugila to pass this question to Mr. Peksa, and if he can answer that on the Facebook or whatever avenue is possible. The question to Mr. Peksa is, can EU effectively challenge China's rise and its religious and human rights freedom without changing the EU foreign policy requirement to a majority decision of EU states? Is this likely in the foreseeable future? Mr. Peksa, you have a question to answer today evening. And thank you once again to everybody. I'm very honored to be part of this panel. Mr. Peksa, Madam Rielle, Commissioner Turkell, and Dr. Tsering, Topgyal. Once again, thank you very much. Have a good evening and see you tomorrow on the second theme. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.